Hello Plant Fam, my name is Romani from Mother of Leafy Boys, and today we're going to be looking at the easiest plants for each of the plant genuses. My back is sweaty. I'm gonna just leave it looking real brown. Just in my opinion, don't do that. Start us off, of course, this is just an, don't do this, that's where my mic is, I should move it. Whew. Okay, so just to start us off, I do want to put a little disclaimer in. This is just in my opinion and my experience caring for plants. I have had a pretty serious plant collection going on since about 2018, so it's been quite a few years of collecting. I have over 200 plus plants. These are the plants that were some of the best plants to start off with when I was venturing into a new genus of plant. We're not going to get through every single kind of plant today. I'm planning on making this a bit of a series if you guys are interested. Today we're going to be going through philodendron, Anthurium, Peperomia, and Alocasia. So those are the four that we're going to be going through today, and I'm actually going to break philodendron up into trailing, climbing, and crawling. And hopefully these are going to be a bit different to what you would commonly get. I know a lot of beginner plant people, when you look up, best beginner plants, you're going to get a lot of pothos, you're going to get a lot of dracaenas, snake plants, and I'm hoping that today this is not only good for beginners who are wanting to try out, some easier plants, but also for people that are collectors and are wanting to branch out into different kinds of plants that they haven't tried before. So hopefully there's a little bit of something for everyone. And if there is a genus that I haven't mentioned today that you're really interested in learning a little bit more about, or wanting to find an easy plant to start your journey in that genus, let me know in the comments below and I will be happy to put them in my next video that I make on this series. So to start off with today, I'm actually not going to do the one that's in my hand. I just thought this one was really pretty. I'll put it back. We're actually going to start off with a genus that I have a massive love-hate relationship with, and that is the Peperomia. So I only in the past couple of years have really felt like I've mastered Peperomia enough that I've bought some rare versions of it. And I have spent a fair bit of money on rare Peperomia now, which you would not do unless you're feeling like you're a little bit more comfortable with that plant genus. And after many failed watermelon Peperomias, I might put like a little picture here or a little video here of what the plant that I'm talking about. I have it in my collection, but I don't want to get it. So if you've experienced this plant, I feel like you have killed it at some point. I don't think I've ever heard of someone who's bought a watermelon Peperomia for the first time and successfully kept it alive, ever. I feel like every single person who's a new plant parent will see this plant, think it's gorgeous, instantly kill it. That kind of made me give up on Peperomias altogether. They're really unforgiving. I feel like if you overwater them even a little bit, you're just going to watch it slowly die afterwards. It doesn't even yellow its leaves, it just drops its leaves, which is a very different experience to most plant genuses, where if you overwater it, it yellows a little bit. It might be hard to come back from, but most of the time if you let it dry out, you can recover that plant, or maybe you have to repot it so it doesn't have root rot, but most of the time it is recoverable, and I found that that wasn't the case for most of my Peperomia. The plant that really helped me figure out the care needs for Peperomia, but was still a little bit more forgiving, was the Peperomia Hope. I think I just knocked a leaf off there. Oh, I did. I knocked a little leaf off. That's all right. It'll grow more. But you can see this very long, beautiful plant here. I also have a second one on the corner of my window. If you've seen my plant room in my Instagram, I have another one hanging on my windowsill as well. But this is just such a beautiful plant. I was attracted to Peperomia because Peperomia have a lot of plants with round leaves. It's kind of quintessential for a Peperomia is to have some version of a roundish leaf. And this plant was just stunning. I think the first time I saw it was on Jungle Haven's channel. Might have been. I'm pretty sure it was on Jungle Haven's channel. And I just fell in love with it, but I've had so many issues with Peperomia in the past. I was very nervous about taking care of it. I decided I was just going to go for it and buy it. And obviously, this is the exact same one that I bought. The one that I have in the corner is actually cuttings from this plant because I've made 1,000 propagations of this plant, which is why it looks so small considering how long I've had it. But it is just a gorgeous plant and very, very forgiving. So a brief rundown of its plant care. I think Peperomias in general prefer less of a chunky soil. So they don't want your typical really chunky aeroid soil with your chunky aeroid bark and your charcoal and things like that. So they still want to be able to dry out fast. I think a sandier soil would be better most of the time. But they do want that aeration. You don't want to chuck it in straight potting mix that you got from Bunnings, like a really typical water retentive sort of stodgy soil that doesn't breathe. It's going to get root rot in that. I also suggest not potting it directly into pots unless it's like a terracotta. What I like to do is actually put it in a clear pot. I don't know if you can see that. So this is in a clear pot. Hopefully it will focus for you. And that way I can monitor the roots. When you lift it up, if you see condensation, so if it looks wet on the soil there or you see condensation in the pot there, don't water it. Pop it back in. If you lift it up and there's water in the bottom of this catchment pot, there's no drainage hole in this, I water it in place, then I just check to make sure that there's no water left in the bottom. And if you check and there's no water left in there, you're great. If there's water, tip it out. Water it in the morning, and by the afternoon I would check some of my plants to make sure they weren't sitting in water. I don't check all of my plants. Most of my plants don't mind sitting in a bit of water for a day or two. I wouldn't suggest it for a lot of plants, but for this particular plant, it does not like sitting in water. So my Peperomia, I will check and I will make sure that it's no longer sitting in any water. They don't want to be watered again before they've completely dried out. So I will check, I'll even look, if it's a black pot that I can't see through, I will put my finger through one of the holes in the bottom of the pot, and if the bottom of the pot still feels dry, like this one here, the soil in the bottom there feels dry, this can be watered now. So it is watering day for these plants, which is why I've picked today. But this plant will get a good thorough watering. Sometimes I'll take it to the shower and give it a big rinse off with its leaves as well. Plants love that, it helps to prevent pests. But I find that this plant was really easy to care for. It doesn't really get a lot of pests. I found a lot of my other Peperomias ended up getting things like mealy bugs, surprisingly. With this plant, I found it didn't get pests a lot, which meant that it gave me a bit more of an opportunity to figure out what kind of watering it likes. Really likes light. The more light you give it, the better. Most Peperomia, if you put them in a low light area, they're just going to die. They're just going to die. Whether this one was in a slightly lower, I would say medium light. It's a bit hard to explain what that is, but it was an area that didn't get a lot of bright light, and it didn't grow that much, but it also didn't die. Whether any other Peperomia put in that situation probably just would have turned its toes up and died. So if you're wanting to try out Peperomia for the first time, I really suggest it. I just cannot speak enough about how beautiful this plant is and how easy it is to grow. Our next genus of plant that I want to talk about is Anthuriums. I think 2025 is going to be the year of the Anthurium. I feel like they're popping up a lot more in plant stores. I'm seeing a lot more of those super rare plants popping up online. And I know the plant that you think that I'm about to pick up is a Clairnervium, but it is not. Isn't it gorgeous? So this is my Anthurium Magnificum. I wanted to talk mainly about the Magnificum and therefore the Magnificum hybrids as well, because most of the time if it's hybridized, they pick out the strongest parts of the genetics, and Magnificums have really great genetics. This was not my first Anthurium. My first Anthurium was the Clairnervium, and it did help me out quite a bit, but I found that this plant really taught me about Anthurium lighting. I have a lot of experience with plants that really are sun thirsty. They really want that bright light. Just that's not the case for Anthuriums, which I think a lot of people might really enjoy, because if you've been a plant collector for a long time like me, you're running out of room next to the window. There are definitely Anthuriums that will crave the light a lot more than others. There are definitely some very light thirsty plants. I found the Magnificum was not one of them, but for the most part this gets low to medium light. There are some days where it feels very low. If it's a cloudy day, it's only getting ambient room light. Medium light, great to read by. Bright light, you know, you've got a light over your shoulder essentially that you're reading by. And then you've got direct light, which is where you see the actual physical beams of light touching the plant. But anything lower than like, I can't read the words on this page, or I have to really squint and take too much time, that's considered no light. That's not bright enough for a plant. Sorry about my tangent about light. This is getting, you know, medium-ish light, a little bit of a lower light, and it's growing happier than when I had it in bright light. I had it having a little bit of direct light and mainly bright indirect light, and its leaves turned this really light green. Its leaves started to curl backwards as well, which was very strange. It just didn't look happy, and I thought maybe I'm overwatering it, maybe I'm underwatering it. I really took my time to check on it and to figure it out, and it was very forgiving. Even though its leaves looked almost like they were at the beginning stages of yellowing, they never yellowed off. Turns out it didn't like how much light it was getting, and it actually wanted to be pulled away from the window more, and now it's super happy. I don't really have any problem with the edges going crispy. This is one of the older leaves, and you can see it is, the camera is very forgiving. It is a touch yellow, because it's one of the older leaves that went through that transition phase. But overall, this is just such a happy plant, and I'm finding it really easy to care for and forgiving as I try to figure out what this kind of plant wants. But yeah, super chunky soil. Anthuriums want to be up potted more than most, so they want a chunky soil, and they want to grow into big pots of soil. Magnificum, it is magnificent. Alright, so the next plant that we're going to be looking at is philodendron, and again, as I said earlier, we're going to break philodendron up into 3 categories. So we're going to have your trailing, your climbing, and your crawling. So we're going to start off with this little plant that you saw at the beginning of the video. So this is my suggestion for a trailing philodendron. It is a philodendron Rio. Personally, I love the variegation on the Rio. If you're someone like me that loves white variegation in plants, I think this one is just, it's just it, you know, it's just the it plant. I don't feel that it really loses variegation easily. It sort of self-propagates, and it will put off more stems all on its own. Now, trailing philodendrons are not really a plant that you need to really think about the plant care for. These plants in general are some of your like really easy beginner plants anyway, because they are, you know, if you overwater them, they'll sort of get over it. Just let it dry out. If you let it dry out too much, it's all right, just give it a water. Like most of the time, these are very forgiving plants. I let this one dry out a little bit. I think the most damage I had, a little bit of browning on that leaf because I let it dry out. And when I say let it dry out, I didn't water it for like 2 weeks. I saw that it was floppy as well. It was a little sad. And I was like, why do you look so sad? You don't normally look sad. And then I was like, ooh, I forgot you. And it was like, yeah, no, it's all right. Beautiful variegation. I find the more you chop these, if you're being careful to make sure that you're chopping it back to where you see really good variegation, you can make it grow really beautiful and have really stunning variegation as well. It really likes to be pruned. Likes a chunky soil as well, but is also one of those plants that's a little bit more forgiving if you don't want to spend all that money to make yourself an aeroid soil. You can make this climb, but there are some varieties of philodendron that if you don't put it up a stake and you don't make it climb, its leaves are going to just put out runners. So if you don't make it climb, it's not going to trail like this. It's not going to look like this beautiful lush pot. It's just going to put out runners until it finds something that it can climb. You could put this up a stake or up a moss pole and it will climb and its leaves will get bigger and it'll be really pretty. But if I leave it to trail, it's not going to end up with these tiny little dinky leaves or super long leafless tendrils, right? It's still going to put out leaves. And that's a true trailing philodendron, is one that doesn't put off those little dinky leaves because you haven't put it on a moss pole. We're going to do the crawling philodendron next. This one's heavy. Oh my God. Hello. This is my suggestion for a crawling philodendron. You can't even see it all. So we're going to talk like this through the plant. So this is my philodendron gloriosum, specifically white vein. There are so many different kinds of gloriosums. So there's the gloriosum that is just your plain green one, the one that you'll find most at like your typical plant stores. Then there is your white vein, which is this one here. Then you've got your white vein dark form. Then you've got your, oh, there's more. There's a round form as well, which has a more rounded leaf than this one here has. Oh, there's more, but I can't even think of them now. But there's lots of different kinds, and honestly, I would say most of them are pretty similar. Like as in their care requirements are pretty similar. Some would argue that your typical green form is probably your easiest out of all of them. I have both. I have a typical green form and I have this white veins, and I actually would argue that my white vein grows faster and has bigger leaves than my typical green one. This one does have the advantage of having multiple babies in the pot. It was a tissue culture, so it had a lot of offshoots, and I kind of just let the offshoots grow wild. Your crawling philodendron don't typically want to be sitting in water. Kind of like your peperomia, except less dramatic. They'll get those yellowing leaves, and they are more susceptible to root rot. They usually climb along the topsoil on forest floors and things like that. So they don't want a deep pot either. If you pot them in a really deep pot, the roots are most likely not to go down to the bottom, which will end up making the bottom of your soil really, really damp and muddy, and that can lead to things like root rot. So putting yours in a chunkier soil with more aeration, so things like putting charcoal in it and perlite and pumice and bits of bark, those are things that can really help make your soil a little bit more airy for this plant. You can see here, if I take it out, that's how deep the pot is. I'll turn it around for you actually. So yeah, that's how deep the pot is. It's not very deep. How much of that? It's less deep than my hand in total. The cash pot that I've got it in is also very shallow. So it doesn't really want a deep pot. Mine is in a round pot where I know people typically put them in long pots, rectangular pots. I don't like rectangular pots. I'm a round gal. I like things to be round. I like my pots to be round. So I like my plants to be round. So I was determined to grow it in a round pot because I didn't want to go get a rectangular one. I didn't want to do it. Not happening. So all I did was, as it's crawling and it's heading towards the edge of the pot, I will just sort of redirect it so that it starts to circle, and I'll redirect it using like things like stakes to sort of push it in a certain direction, bobby pins, wires, things like that I can just sort of redirect it to go around the pot rather than go over the edge. At this point, I'm letting some of them go over the edge because there is simply no room for it to wrap around in the pot anymore. It is that full back there. So again, we are getting to a problematic stage with this plant, but overall, it has been an amazing grower. When they're really small, you might end up with that typical little princess shoe. I think I'm looking at one right now of some of the smaller stems. They do that little princess shoe thing that makes it hard for it to grow, and sometimes it will break the leaf, but that's why I like this plant, because it taught me about that and is more forgiving. You'll see there's some ripped leaves. There are some ripped leaves that I have that have some damage on it from that little princess Cinderella shoe thing, where you can see they've gotten some damage from how they came out. But it taught me how to safely get rid of the princess shoe, getting in there with a cotton tip. Sometimes I still fail, but yeah, it really taught me how to take care of philodendrons that do that princess shoe, how to take care of crawling plants that don't like to be sitting in water. And since then I've gotten things like my pastazanum and things like that that are a little bit more finicky, but because I started off with this one, I pretty much knew what I needed to do at the end of the day. All right, hello. So this is the next one that I'm going to talk about, which is your climbing philodendron. Now, I'm kind of tempted to give you two options here, because I really do think that there is a difference between climbing philodendrons that are variegated and climbing philodendrons that are not. So this is my variegated option for you. If you're looking for a variegated plant, you want a really pretty one. Let me lift it up so you can have a little look. You're looking for a really cool variegated philodendron that can climb. This is a great option. It will climb, it wants to climb, but it also can just be staked up. Find there's a lot of climbing philodendron that want a moss pole and are going to be very adamant about wanting a moss pole or a coir pole or something that it can really root into. Now, most climbing plants will love to have a moss pole more than anything else. I think that's what they really want. They want something that they can wrap their roots into like they do in nature. But the philodendron Burley Marks variegata is one plant that I find doesn't mind as much if it's climbing up a stake rather than climbing up a moss pole, which is really great when you're someone who's like getting into climbing plants and hasn't had a moss pole before and you don't really want to venture into the world of moss poles. I suggest this plant. You still get your cool variegation, but at the same time, you don't have to have a moss pole. So you can see the variegation does eventually turn to be a little bit more white. It's a little bit unstable, sorry guys. Starts out a bit more yellow, it can eventually turn a bit more white. It will sporadically give you some green ones as well, but I find it's a really great plant because it self-heads as well. So what I mean by that is it will put off its own new stem if you look at this plant, it is just absolutely full of stems. So full. Hold on, let me turn this around so you can see the back of it. That's the back. There are just so many stems in there. If you want it to bring back its variegation, often you either let it continue to grow, the variegation will come back on its own, or you chop it back and it will, you know, probably put off 3 to 4 more heads after you've chopped it back. That's just how vigorous I find this plant grows. If you give it a moss pole, I find its leaves will size up a lot more. It will be a lot happier to grow up a moss pole because, again, its leaves will get much bigger. But I like putting it on a stake because I want it to be really bushy. This one I think it's a bit unstable in its pot because it's gotten very big. It's a bit unyieldy. So yieldy. Don't know. Pretty happy plant. Pretty happy camper, very dry, needs to be watered. Sorry mate, I'll put you under the shower and clean your leaves because your leaves are also incredibly dusty. If anything, doing these videos has made me realize how dusty my plants are because I'm like up close and personal and really looking at how dusty they've gotten. Yes, it will go green. I've had mine grow green and then suddenly, out of nowhere, it's got a full white leaf. Why? Don't know. You'd think it's all in the stems. Sometimes it just recreates variegation for the fun of it. Give it a go. I don't think you'll regret it. But the next one I'm going to show you is a philodendron that is a climbing philodendron typically. But 1, it's on a moss pole, and 2, it is not variegated. So give me a second. So this one here is my philodendron majestic. So it is a cross between the philodendron verrucosum and the philodendron soderoy, which are 2 plants that I own both, absolutely love them both, but they're both a little bit harder. This one here, however, I got it as a pretty small plant as well, quite a small baby, and I've only had it for 6 months. I definitely haven't had it for a year. It's not that old in my collection. It's not super young, but I had it from a little baby and I've grown it up the moss pole and then I've chopped and propped it back and then I grew it up another moss pole. So this is probably the 2nd time around growing to the top of its moss pole, and it's going to need to be chopped and propped again. You can see that's its top leaf here. Its top leaf is still to get a little bit bigger. It's not fully hardened off yet. I think it's about 3 stems that's currently in this pot. It has really beautiful variegation. It's not variegation. What would you call this? Just like patterns on the leaf? I don't want to get in your light. It has a really nice back as well, I find. Look. So shiny and shimmery as well. Likes growing up a moss pole. It will get a little bit small and a little bit more runnery if you take it off the moss pole or take it off a pole in general, which is why I wanted to also put the belly marks in this category. A little bit more prone to pests, but pretty resilient. Doesn't do the little shoe thing that annoys me so much, or at least it hasn't done that in my care. I haven't experienced that with this particular plant. Can deal with a little bit of a lower light. I've got this one pulled away from the window. It's probably about a meter and a bit from the window, from a north facing window in Brisbane. Solid option. All right, let me put this one back. This next one is a bit big, so give me a second. Hi. So our final one in this collection is Alocasia. And the Alocasia that I have in front of you right now is stunning. It's the Alocasia macrorhiza albovariegata. Hope I said that right. We'll find out when people tell me in the comments. It's a super stunning plant, white variegation, It is, again, one that I've picked because the white variegation is less likely to brown than on other plants, and it grows big. I think we all want big alocasias. Like, why are we growing them if we don't want big alocasias? If you follow me on my Instagram, you know I'm a big alocasia gal. I love having a big leaf alocasia. It's what I'm all about. Less likely to get spider mites than other alocasias, but does definitely show you when it needs to be watered. It's a very thirsty gal. I like to let this one sit in water for a little bit longer so that it can soak up as much as it needs, but obviously I do not want it to sit directly in water, so I have it with a little bit of a riser in it that stops it from sitting directly at the bottom. So it might send out some roots to get to the water at the bottom of the pot. Kind of like my own makeshift self-watering pot, but not really. Maybe I'll do a video on how I do that for a lot of my plants, where I kind of make my own version of a self-watering pot, but not really. Bit of a weird one, but yeah, less prone to pests than most, less prone to getting brown leaves than most alocasia, and grows big really fast. And my favorite part is that they have come down in price quite a lot, so they're not as expensive as they used to be, but just a really great and easy care plant. Make sure you take it to the shower, wash its leaves frequently so you don't get those pesties. Give it bright light. Alocasias like bright light. Doesn't matter what alocasia it is, it wants that bright light. Give it the bright light. Put it closer to the window. If you've got it further away from the window, put a little bit closer. Just do it. Put a little bit closer to the window. Give it a chunkier soil. Not too chunky, not as chunky as I'll put in the Anthurium, but you know, maybe we can go through my alocasia care one day and we can get a little bit more detail on these bad boys. But if you're wanting to try an alocasia for the first time, you've never had one before, try this one. Yeah? Just do it. Trust me. You don't know me, but trust me. Trust me on this one. Try this alocasia. I think it's gorgeous. I hope you guys enjoyed that video. I hope, you know, this gives you the courage to experiment and try a new plant genus that maybe you've not given a go before. Go do it, go try that different plant. If there is a different plant genus that I didn't talk about today that you want me to talk about, I think I have Hoya planned, Syngonium, and a couple of others, but if there is one that you would particularly like, please make sure that you tell me in the comments, and I will try and make a video on that one as well. But that is it for today. See you guys, see you in the next one.